Hey, all y'all, this is Jeremy chiming in real quick here before I jump into the episode. Just a trigger warning for sexual abuse. This whole episode is going to be about abuse and how the church covers it up, and how now that the religious right is involved with the political right, and someone like Speaker Mike Johnson is a good example of a lot of what I want to talk about abuse that happens in spiritual settings, now covering up the abuse of a politician. But as a therapist, I follow what the research says in that using correct language is very important. And I'm not somebody who's algorithm friendly. I'm not somebody who is necessarily mincing words to get clicks, because when you are doing harm reduction, you don't want to say unaliving. You want to use the word suicide. When you're talking about sexual abuse, you want to use anatomically correct terms. You want to use the word rape. You want to talk about violence, and you want to talk about things like, you want to use the words that mean what you want them to use. And so in my professional setting, that makes a lot of sense, but in a podcast, maybe that'll be a little jarring. And so if anyone is triggered by those topics, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Obviously I recorded the episode because I think it is worthwhile information, but if that's something that's going to trigger you, it might not be worthwhile for you. If it is something that you want to learn more about and understand, I appreciate you tuning in, but take breaks, have a plan to take care of yourself, give yourself some grace, connect with your support system. Trigger warning for sexual abuse and religious abuse in general. All right. Really great plug. Enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy. I am your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist. Today, I had charted out a loose topic around grounding. Because, everything's crazy, and wouldn't it be nice if we just had like a basic acknowledgement that things are crazy? And I don't know, that might be helpful for folks, I thought. And then I saw something that made me mad, and I wanted to talk about instead. Not that grounding's not important, but so go in nature, touch grass, do your grounding, talk to your support system, count prime numbers backwards from 117. Do things, learn about tapping. That's all cool. But let's talk about Mike Johnson, because this was not a revelation. Using some triggering language here. Mike Johnson is Speaker of the House because he has spent years in churches where deferring to authority is the proper stance. And it wasn't like a brand new idea I had, but it clicked into place where Mike Johnson's Speaker of the House, not just to solidify the evangelical support behind Donald Trump, but because Mike Johnson, much like Pam Bondi, much like however many speakers, press secretaries he's had, Mike Johnson is uniquely qualified to be able to cover up a scandal because he's been in fundamentalist evangelical spaces. And so I watched this interview and was like, oh, that's spiritual bypassing. Oh, that's DARVO. That's, doing all these things that we see in church. He's using the right language, but he's using it incorrectly. He's using buzzwords as a way to highlight that he knows what's going on, but to protect the authority. And the reason this is something that sticks out to me as somebody who works with religious trauma, and I think a lot of fundamentalists of any religious background who grew up around fundamentalism will recognize this. We'll get into I have some case studies. But the church has been protecting pedophiles for a lot longer than the Republican Party has, because the church has been around a lot longer than the Republican Party. Not that Republicans don't have a long history of this. This is not a new thing with Donald Trump and, being in the Epstein files. And again, like when I wanted to do the episode about grounding, some of this was because, like, of course, Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. We have some bits and pieces that have come out over the years of those files. He was in the flight logs at least 7 times. Like, this is not news. I think this is the cynical side of me, and I'm not a political analyst. I get most things wrong if I try and make political predictions. But the cynical side of me is, they got the rich oligarchs who are running the country got the desired tax cut they wanted, and now they can dump Trump because he's actually bad for the economy because he's not good at business. And so I think the Epstein stuff is coming up and has legs in a way that it hasn't been squashed before, partially because the wealthy people are okay letting him go now that they got their tax cuts. And like the bill that got signed will define American financial policy for the next decade. Like that's just sort of the way that our government does things. So it's not like, oh, when we get the next House and Senate votes in 2026, we can undo all this, or the next president can undo all of this. It's why we got taxes going up under Biden. That was Trump and what's his first name? I can see his derpy little face. Paul Ryan, who's from Wisconsin. Not a pride and joy of ours. That's the tax plan they passed in 2017, and it included a tax increase while potentially Trump wouldn't be in office because, again, he enacted a bunch of unpopular policies. And like, I'm off track here, but again, this is where it's like maddening. I don't think it's conspiratorial because everything I've said so far is easily verifiable. But that's what sort of happens where it's like, oh, there's this power structure that's existed for a long time. It must have some utility. And so, like, the church has done that for millennia, that religious people are, by default, moral because they belong to a church. But when we dig in and we look at who's most likely to be a sexual abuser of minors, the number one response to that is religious leaders by, like, a not close degree. It is not close. The odds on most likely profession to abuse a child is a religious leader. And so the group of predators that QAnon and whoever else has been like chasing their tail to find since needing a cover to be bigoted against women when Hillary was running, has built this frenzy around this pedophile ring. And like, yeah, there is a pedophile ring. There's a couple of them. We've known about that, right? Like Diddy was just in court and will be sentenced soon, not for as many crimes as he should have been found guilty for, but for doing this, right? Like rich people get bored and lean towards the worst excesses because they have no accountability. And for some of those people, they're awful people and they want to rape children. And Jeffrey Epstein made millions, probably billions of dollars doing this. And he was close personal friends with Donald Trump. Like, this is not news that the Wall Street Journal publishes Donald Trump's handwritten letter to Jeffrey Epstein for his 50th birthday. Is like, again, we've known this stuff since before Trump ran for president, even in 2015. We knew about this stuff in 2006 when Epstein had his sort of public fall from grace, which again, like why he was ever in the public grace in the first place, because rich people have power. I don't know. We think that people who are wealthy have done something good when all evidence would point to the contrary. We think that people who belong to a church are moral people when all evidence points to the contrary. So that was where it's like, hey, we should do some grounding because it's crazy making time. But while I think grounding is important, I think the crazy making is more complex and also something I can talk about, where lots of people can talk about grounding really effectively. That doesn't need to be me. So yeah, I mentioned just a couple of things on where I thought some of this stuff would go. So let's start with, I brought up spiritual bypassing. A quick sort of short definition of spiritual bypassing is using religious language to avoid dealing with real harm or emotional work. I think in parenthetical thoughts. So it's easy for me to like want to add to these definitions. But I think the example I often use is let go and let God. So you're struggling with something, a relationship, a family dynamic, a leader who's been abusive to you, whatever it is, and you're stressing about it. And instead of saying like, let's do something helpful, let's do a breathing technique, let's go for a walk, let's talk through it with your support system, let's do, a cost benefit analysis, let's do anything that could be helpful. It's just thought stopping. That's what it is. It's let go and let God. It's stop thinking about this. Your magical friend who lives in the clouds will take care of it for you. You don't need to worry about it. And again, when there is no magical friend in the clouds, this literally does nothing other than gets the person who is concerned about it to let it go. And so that can be really like a bummer when something sad has actually happened, like dealing with grief or loss. But in the context of talking about abuse, when a church leader has done something harmful, let go and let God is actively incorrect recommendations. To say let go of your concerns about the abuse you've experienced and let God deal with it is a preposterous stance to take. That isn't what accountability looks like. And I think the church that I grew up in, which was the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod, which has had 2 people in the state of Wisconsin fired, and then I don't know where the legal stance. I won't say they have charges pressed, but like legal proceedings are happening for these people for doing inappropriate things with kids and minors, and that I'm going to say in both cases, as not a legal professional, the churches and schools knew about it and worked to cover it up. So, that's just the little tiny group that most people haven't heard of that I come from in the past calendar year. At least 2 examples that I'm personally aware of, because I know the people who were doing it or the schools that they worked at, like, because it's a super small thing. And then extrapolate that by size, right? So the Southern Baptist Convention had a huge sex scandal that the leaders covered up for decades. The Catholic Church is still embroiled in and has ongoing sex scandals. The new Pope is actively worked in covering it up. So, just Google whatever religious group you want to look up and type in sex scandal after that, and you will find some, because it happens in every organized religion. The other tactic that I talked about, or that I mentioned sort of in the intro here, is DARVO, which is a acronym for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. And what happens a lot with religious groups is they start with deny and the attack first. DARVO is a wonderful little acronym, because this is like, you just see it. Once you know what to look for, you see it all the time. So that didn't happen. And if it did, it was the other person's fault, right? So like the idea that this person would bring this up, no, that didn't happen. Well, now there's some credible claims that it did happen, so now we need to attack that person. Well, they were dressing provocatively, or, oh, shoot, we're talking about a 7-year-old wearing suspenders, so we can't go with that. So, they're making it up to get attention, or they're whatever. Family is looking for money. Like these attacks are gross, and it's designed to deflect and like cause the distraction, and then reverse, victim, and offender. And that almost always plays out where the church is saying they are the victims of persecution. It is unfair or incorrect that they are being held to account. The Catholic Church is not one organization, but 100,000 little organizations. So no, you can't go after their money because they're bankrupt, actually, even though they own a gigazillion trillion dollars. I don't know how much the Catholic Church is worth. A lot. Half of the world's wealth at some point. And then they claim religious persecution. And so what got me fired up about this was Mike Johnson saying, we are being mega transparent, ultra transparent. I forget what, super transparent. I forget what he said. It was such a like stupid, over the top turn of phrase to be like, that's, you don't understand what transparency is, obviously. But again, Mike Johnson is evangelical. His wife was practicing a form of pastoral counseling, which is not a real thing, as we'll get to, in which like she was identifying humors within the blood that were making people upset. Like that's how unscientific this family is. And again, like, reminder, Mike Johnson thinks that his son looking at porn is wrong, but is also okay with his son knowing what porn he looks at because that's what he thinks accountability looks like. It's creepy. And again, as somebody who like was Christian and worked at a Christian counseling for a while, these accountability porn groups always fall apart. When somebody watches porn, then everybody else takes it as permission to watch porn. And they all sort of like, oh, well, like, let's all get back on track together. It's not what accountability actually looks like in any way, shape, or form. I don't enjoy talking about this stuff. I just am taking a quick moment to ground myself as I breathe, and it's a podcast, so you can't see me, but I don't look happy. It's not awesome that somebody who does this stuff and comes from this background is third in line for the presidency. It's not awesome that our president is a pedophile. Significantly worse than Mike Johnson. So spiritual bypassing and DARVO are common tactics that people will use here. I think you can pick a church scandal and you will see this stuff. Again, so the context that got me fired up is Mike Johnson talking about releasing the Epstein files when Mike Johnson, more than once in the past week, has made sure that any sort of vote, by the time this episode comes out, it's probably 2 weeks old news. Hopefully it's still in the news cycle. Not because I care about clicks, but because I don't want this to go away, because we shouldn't have pedophiles running the country. Or anywhere really, let's protect kids. The Epstein files are being blocked by Republicans, specifically Mike Johnson. He just like sent the House home, which they're going to get paid for not working until September. Must be nice. There's just corruption all the way through. This is such an irritating thing. Church abuse scandals are really terrible, but when it's like tied to then like political stuff, I bang my head against a wall worse than some of the other stuff. Active listeners might be like, Jer, are you okay? Right. The whole topic of the podcast is us mental health professionals also need help. I have a lovely therapist. She's great. So yes, Mike Johnson used what I saw as like church tactics on how somebody can deny abuse and work to cover it up, and then like do the PR end run around from any sort of accountability. So, I mean, the Catholic Church is the obvious example. They knew about priests abusing little boys and girls, but a lot of little boys for decades. And instead of having any sort of accountability, because they are not mandated reporters, they would cover it up and send that priest to a different parish where he would continue to abuse people. Now, the Catholic Church knew about this for decades, and the Catholic Church today, as of recording in 2025, is still spending millions of dollars to fight court cases saying that the statute of limitations has expired and therefore they do not owe victims any money. How dare the legal system come after the church, which is supposed to have religious freedom? And again, think through that argument for more than a second and understand that the church is arguing for the religious freedom to rape little kids. And that it's shitty. So they knew about the abuse. They knew enough to move the priests around. And like, why, right? I think that's something that gets lost sometimes, especially for people who aren't religious. Why would the church do this? Because in their mind, I'm not defending this, it's not okay. But in their mind, the institution, the Catholic Church, the Southern Baptist Convention, Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod, the church institution's reputation will take a hit that is more damaging to the church itself, and depending on how fundamentalist evangelical they are, God's chosen work, the reason for our existence, is harmed by this, and therefore whatever harm is done to victims, individuals that they are, is not stacked up. It does not compare to the potential fallout for the church. Now, that's fucked, right? like maybe a church that is having such problems with this shouldn't exist in the first place, and probably isn't doing God's work. But also the cynical side of me says, actually, the reputation hit for this stuff isn't that bad, because apparently for a lot of people, raping children is not a deal breaker. Looking at you, 70 million people who voted for Trump more than once. But also the people who are still like going to the Catholic Church, like, yes, attendance is way down. Some churches have had to close, some parishes, some archdioceses, those are the smaller branches of the Catholic Church, in a way that the Catholic Church protects all their money from getting sued into oblivion, is pretending that these are separate business entities. That's a whole separate topic that people who are smarter than me can talk about. But it's a way in which again, the church is implementing some of these DARVO tactics where like they are being persecuted. The idea that the church is under attack is unhelpful to their entire reason for existence. Now, I work with a lot of people with religious trauma. I see people who left the church. I was at some point some version of a true believer. I see people who have invested a lot of time and energy and huge chunks of their life as true believers. There are lots of people within fundamentalist and as evangelical spaces who are true believers. I personally am deeply skeptical that a ton of people in upper leadership are actual believers. You know, like someone like Mike Johnson, I think is hard to tell. I think he is probably on some level a believer, and also, you know, deeply unwell and craves power for unknown reasons. I don't know enough about his history. He's actually like a pretty protected politician in the sense of like what his background is, and what his personal story is. So but like, yeah, I don't think a lot of the popes were true believers. I think they know it is a business institution and you'd make business decisions to protect the institution. I think a lot of people who go through seminary at some point have some version of cognitive dissonance that says, this probably isn't like good what we're doing. On the whole, we're perhaps not the good guys. And you know, some of them are victims of religious abuse themselves without being aware of it, without they've accepted it. They think it's good. And again, so this is where DARVO comes in, but also the spiritual bypassing, where like suffering can be a good thing. God rewards a good sufferer. I've been out of the church for a while. I don't remember how some of the stuff, like the meek shall inherit the earth. Like you're not supposed to make it accountability for the institution is selfish. How dare you? Don't hurt the church's mission. Offer up your suffering. Forgive like Christ. And again, like, yuck. No, don't. I don't think Christ was an actual historical figure. Like, I think it's a mythical figure who never actually existed. But like, what is in the Gospels that have survived at this point is shake the dust from your sandals for people who are not following these teachings. Like, this is stuff that has been bastardized over centuries. And again, to solidify those power structures and protect the structure itself, so people in power maintain power, but that they can also spread their power. They can give their power to other people throughout generations. Cults, small cults, because again, I think Christianity is a cult, especially like your fundamentalist groups. But we grew up on a compound and all wear the same color robe style of cults. What I think people colloquially in the wider cultural zeitgeist think of as cults do the power structures wrong. They're often cults of personality. And so that one leader falling or dying, because usually like a leader could be outed as a pedophile or a criminal or whatever, and the cult still follows them. Oftentimes people will double down in their belief rather than leave the cult. It's a whole thing. So the idea that that power structure is institutionalized and then protected on the institutional level is what cults don't do. So David Koresh dying, and like most of his followers, right? That's maybe an unfair example. But some of these larger cult leaders, when the cult leader dies, the cult does too. If there's not a clean handoff of power, which there usually isn't, because the person who's leading it is so narcissistic and power hungry. And again, I'm not saying personality disorder. I've talked about that elsewhere, but I'm adjective. I'm going on vacation soon. I need it. My English teacher parents would be deeply disappointed in me for one, not being a Christian anymore, but for two, not remembering my English teaching lessons. But the Catholic Church, the Southern Baptist Convention, even a small group like the Wells is an institution. And so the power structures are designed to survive multiple generations. The Republican Party, the GOP, is an institution. Having one Speaker of the House who's outed as a pedophile wasn't enough to end things for them, right? Dennis Hastert, that predates me being alive. Shoot, I need to Google that. Former Speaker of the House of Representatives, also a pedophile. That doesn't come up first in his Wikipedia page, but it probably should. Okay. I've rambled around and I think maybe loosely built my point here. Firm examples beyond the Catholic Church, which, like, again, is a very good example. It's just such a overwhelmingly depressing, bad case study because it's not a singular case study. It is generations of horrific abuse for hundreds of thousands of people. Let's talk about Bill Gothard. A bunch of evangelical Christians who were raised on Bill Gothard's nonsense publications just groaned and rolled their eyes, and also know where I'm going with this. Bill Gothard is one of probably the largest driving forces of publishing evangelical homeschool information. The Christian homeschool has a bunch of issues that I'm not going to get into in this podcast. That's another separate topic. Again, when talking about like church abuse, the web of topics that I could go on about for more than an hour gets pretty vast pretty quickly. Bill Gothard ran the Institute in Basic Life Principles, the IBLP. It was like a little cult of his own, but he promoted family values. Big figure in the family values sort of PR push, and understanding that like Christians are inherently more moral than other people. And again, a lot of his stuff definitely went out into Christian groups. Again, it's not somebody, I didn't grow up with the IBLP, but I knew his work. Like when I came across his work later in life, I maybe didn't know Bill Gothard's name, but I knew the stuff that he was involved in. Over 30 women accused him of grooming, harassment, and abuse. Those were credible accusations. He was forced to step down, and the IBLP did not allow him to come back. The IBLP did defend him for a long time and attacked victims, saying these were attacks from Satan, that he was under attack for his righteousness, that he could talk to other leaders and pastors, and that's what accountability would look like. And that one's like pretty common. A mega church pastor will come out as having had an affair, and the leadership committee will get together and do pastoral counseling with him, and he'll be sorry, so then it's okay. And again, like that sets the stage for no real accountability. So if instead of having one extramarital affair, they had 10, not a problem, because we could just do that. And then like, whoopsies, one of those kids was a minor. So one of those extramarital affairs with the 16-year-olds, again, same thing. And spiritual bypassing comes in to gloss a lot of that over to say God uses broken people, right? We're all sinners. And that's what the Bible's all about. Well, no, that's, first of all, not what the Bible's all about. Pretty famously, the Bible's about the supposed one person in all of history who wasn't sinful. It's kind of the take-home message. So, not that. But again, like picking and choosing and saying, you know, something like David was a serial adulterer. Solomon had 300 wives and 700 concubines. Whoops. Gothard, specifically, his brand of fundamentalism and evangelicalism was like really big on hierarchical structures. So women could not be in leadership. Men were given headship, which is a fancy way of saying they always get to be in charge. And again, so like his teachings also fit with spiritual bypassing because again, they were saying like the umbrella of authority, the authority, God-given authority to a man and to this leadership team puts them on a pedestal where like people who aren't on their level don't get to discredit them, do not get to come after them. And so somebody like Mike Johnson knows how this stuff works and has probably done it. I don't know his home church experiences and scandals. But the idea is out there, and we've seen it in other, even if it's not in your home church, you've seen it in other churches that you're connected to, and you've seen it in other sects for sure, because again, nobody is unaware of the Catholic Church sex scandal. I would argue somebody like Mike Johnson is probably deeply aware of the Southern Baptist Convention because he's from the South. And so their cover up is more recent, 2017 is when it really like became public knowledge. But the cover up was going on for a long time before that. So yeah, Bill Gothard's talked about in Shiny Happy People, for those of you who watch that, or if you're like, I need something that has video and is less loosey-goosey than Jeremy talking about this. Who's the Canadian guy? Ravi Zacharias. Ravi? I don't know if I'm saying that right. But again, like they blame Satan. Satanic attacks on God's servant was a big thing, and the whole structure of that evangelical movement, which again is Canadian, I forget what was that, what specific branch he was in of evangelicalism, but super structured on authoritative. There's an authority, it's hierarchical, it's top-down leadership, and anybody who brought it up while this guy was alive was discredited and shunned or excommunicated and was doing the devil's work. Again, to be clear, trying to get accountability for abuse, trying to hold an abuser to account. And he died in good standing, and it was only after his death that independent investigations were done and confirmed that not only had he been abusing people for decades, but that other leadership and church members had known about it and covered it up. And again, the church body discredited all that stuff using these same tactics. And then we got to say, oh, we didn't know about it. How dare he? We're disappointed in him. And I think that's like the GOP playbook here. I think that's the Republican model, is like being able to say, after the damage has already been done and they've gotten the deeply unpopular policies passed by like Trump distractions and cult of personality stuff, that now they can drop them and say, oh, well, we didn't know. Which again, we've known since at least 2006. And before that, like again, Trump has been recorded in multiple places. Grab him by the pussy. When you're rich, they let you do it. Ivanka made me promise not to date anybody younger than her, and that was for her 17th birthday. Again, like he's been on Howard Stern, like that whole Howard Stern interview he did late 90s, like, ooh, yuck. Why is a real estate mogul buying a beauty pageant? Why is the questionable pedophile that you're best friends with buying real estate on your block so that you can be neighbors in 2 different states? It's maddening. It's maddening. It's maddening. This is why I was going to talk about grounding. So authoritarian control, again, when you believe Christians are great for authoritarian takeovers, right? They understand and appreciate that an all-powerful being that is accountable to no one can pass out judgment and punishment, judge, jury, executioner, with no accountability. That's the Bible. And you're like, no, Jeremy, the Bible's grace. No, it's not. Again, I was raised fundamentalist, so I've read the Bible cover to cover more than one time. Not bragging, putting into context that, like, right, I was raised with this mindset that our understanding of the Bible was better than everyone else's, which is every fundamentalist group. I'm not saying it actually was. I'm just saying that, like, right, the people who are picking and choosing, the people who were less damage was done because they were raised with this metaphorical idea of the Bible. The Bible is all parables, or the Bible is just a metaphor. And like, that's cool. I'm not wishing for people to have experienced more trauma than they did, but I grew up that hell was real and where all of us were going. Like, that was our fate. It is already sealed. And luckily for us, God, who could do anything else because he is truly powerless, he could fart an ice cream cone out for us and say that that saved us. But no, ritualistic blood magic that was common in Judaism is what we had to go with for reasons. But when you believe that an all-powerful being who could do anything else and chooses not to is also all good, and when you believe that morality is defined by a being with no accountability handing out infinite punishment for finite crimes, your sense of morality is off. It just is, right? Like, do you believe that infinite punishment is appropriate for a finite crime? Those things aren't on balance. It's not on the level. If you say yes, okay, well, like, let's read some philosophy and study morality in not our apologetics classes. Let's study something other than Bible history, which is a misnomer. It's not, it's fantasy. And this is why, like, the cult of personality of Donald Trump was able to come in, why a grifter like Donald Trump could come in and take over the voting block of the religious right. This is why the religious right also likes Donald Trump, because they want authoritarian control. And Mike Johnson has the charisma of a used Kleenex. Don't tell him that, because he'll block his son's porn usage. That was an inappropriate joke. The whole model and like where it clicked is like, oh, Mike Johnson's super useful in this role because he's really good at this stuff with spiritual bypassing and DARVO. Is like, he kept talking about like a moral imperative to release the Epstein files. And it's like, the evidence of your behaviors is that you are not releasing the Epstein files. He couched it as it's moral imperative, and we also have to protect the victims. Now, this is a fun little twist on DARVO, right? Like, he's not saying, how dare people attack Donald Trump? That would be sort of the classic DARVO, is like reverse victim, the children that Donald Trump raped, and Donald Trump. But this is saying, this is reversing victim and offender, in that, like, we're going to protect the victim, but what he's really doing is protecting the offenders. Again, we know who a lot of victims are. There have been court depositions. Some of these things are public knowledge. Epstein was a public figure. Giselle, I don't know how to say her name. Maxwell. That's not right. I'm bad at names. I'm bad at names all the time, and faces. It's not a great skill as a therapist. Yeah, like, we know a bunch of the victims. That I think over 15 of them have been publicly named already. So again, like, that's a ludicrous premise to say we're not releasing the files because we need to protect the victims. And so it's reversing victim and offender, not in who they're blaming or who they're attacking, which is the classic DARVO, again, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. They're reversing who they're going to protect. The words coming out of Mike Johnson's mouth are, we need to protect the victims, but the actions he's taking are protecting the perpetrators. They're protecting the offenders. And so, yeah, it's very, very frustrating. If you want to learn more about this, I think Yanni Lalich's work is really good. She wrote Bounded Choice. She's written several good books that are all really good, and she does a lot of work with cultic studies. Stephen Hassan's books are good. He created the BITE model, behavior control, information control, thought control, emotion control, for looking at authoritarian control and continuum of control. It's been really good. Take Back Your Life was the other book I was trying to think of by Ganya Lalich. So those are really good. Obviously, Marlene Winnell's Leaving the Fold is an oldie but a goodie. There's lots of books right now that are out about people's personal experiences in the church with abuse. Behind the Bastards is a podcast about some of history's most terrible people, and they probably like once a month do an episode on either a cult leader or a religious leader. A bit of a running joke that they could do a separate podcast called Behind the Pastors, which would just be Behind the Bastards episodes about religious leaders. And like they could, right? Like there's a whole thing that could exist. Hillsong is like the big mega church that recently, like Justin Bieber, I'm showing my age here. This is not a recent example, but Justin Bieber was like a fan, and I think Chris Pratt was involved somehow. And yeah, like the founder's dad, who was also a pastor, had been abusing people for decades, and like there's a big cover up, and that came out. And then they were also stealing a bunch of money, and that came out. And then there were a bunch of other pastors who were not as famous who were also abusing people, and that came out. Because again, like if you're somebody who is planning to abuse people, if you're somebody who gets off on the idea of having power over other people, you could become a pastor. It's a really great gig for you. It's got access to vulnerable adults and children if you are that kind of predator, and it's got built-in deniability, and it has really good power structures to protect you, the abuser. And like that's why, right? Like, so these systems are self-enforcing, they're reinforcing, they're feedback loops around abuse, where a predator is drawn to this. Predators were drawn to be Boy Scout leaders because there wasn't accountability and they weren't doing background checks. And if you ever did something inappropriate, you would just get moved to another troop. The Boy Scouts of America, a deeply religious group, learned that from the Catholic Church. So again, like this is how organizations can work. Certainly some of the toxic work environments and like why the Me Too movement needed to happen was in like the movie industry and in celebrity circles, because this is an issue everywhere where you have hierarchical power structures and no true accountability, no way to enforce accountability. So yeah, people who are looking to hold leaders to account for the abuse are not sowing division. They aren't bitter. They're not, doing the devil's work. They're not Satan's agents. They're people who've been harmed. And when you're harmed, part of your healing is often looking for some form of justice. Because wouldn't that be nice if that was a thing? Wouldn't it be nice if there's some form of justice? So, yeah. Super fun. It is a weird time to be a therapist. But also, like, doing religious trauma is exhausting right now because you can't get away from it. Certainly not in America, where someone like Mike Johnson is just on TV using spiritual bypassing on an interview about the president being a pedophile. What a crazy sentence that is. But the the idea that, like, again, I've connected with people. Emily Maynard was a guest on the podcast. She like knows a lot of those new apostolic reform people, which is sort of the school of thought that Mike Johnson comes out of. And so if you've left the church and you've been harmed by the church and you're hoping to be a good, well-informed human, and so you follow the news and like then you see spiritual bypassing or you see DARVO in action from somebody who's an out and out Christian claiming some sort of moral high ground, like obviously that's very triggering to what a lot of us experienced in the churches that we left. And so, yeah, that's pretty brutal, which is why like finding good community is super important, why connecting with groups and building social structures that have actual accountability, that is not just, something they talk about, because again, it can be a bit of a buzzword, but they have a system in place, they have structures in place that aren't just like, we're going to go to the elders and the old boys club is going to gather around and protect the old boys in the club. Like when there's an actual sort of systemic approach to accountability, and it's not in-house, it's not our leaders, our elders, our people who were selected by our pastors. And again, like that gets it back into politics of like, right, maybe we should consider it a conflict of interest that the people who were appointed by a certain president are also doing getting legal cases and then dismissing them. What a frustrating time to have a functioning brain. That's the episode. Do we feel better? I don't think we do. But it is interesting, and I'm happy that there are people who are doing the work. There are people who are not doing therapy work, but are sounding the alarm and exposing and highlighting some of these behaviors. I think for those of us who do this work around religious trauma and have concerns about the religious rights taking over the federal government, like that, because to a lot of secular folks, it is nonsense, accurately, because it is nonsense. But there's a way to laugh it off and to dismiss it as some sort of mental failing or delusion or fantasy, and they can't really believe it. And like, again, I don't know that everybody believes it. I'm pretty skeptical that leadership often believes what they're saying. I think they're just protecting their power structure because they benefit from that power structure. But I also think there are people who believe it, and the people who believe it are, sometimes elected officials, but are oftentimes doing low-level terrorism or high-level terrorism, who are feeling compelled by their higher power, by their chosen deity, by the threat of eternal punishment if they don't act on some of this stuff. And like, that is terrible. Obviously, authoritarian leadership is terrible. A theocracy would be terrible. Yeah, a lot of bad outcomes potentially here. And again, like, I don't want to prognosticate. It eventually would collapse. Nobody who's been around religious leadership thinks it's done well. Even people who are still Christian are aware that like leadership's got problems. So this is not a sustainable thing. I think this would hurtle towards revolution faster, I think, or collapse, like a lot of harm can be done. And I think if we're trying to mitigate harm, we certainly need reform and we need true accountability and a lot of this stuff. But it's not all doom and gloom. If shit goes real bad, then it blows up sooner, and hopefully we don't destroy the world in that process with nuclear weapons, and then the next generations can start somewhat fresh. And ultimately, when we look at research, when we do zoom out, and when I do use my grounding techniques that I didn't talk about, we do see that humanity, that civilization continues to progress. But humans don't really get out of the way of progress, and so we have these lurching progresses that are very slow over the course of time, and you can really only see if you look through history, because for most of us, the changes that occur within a lifetime, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Like it's less feeling like progress, and it's a lot of I just did a back and forth motion, but it's podcast, so you can't see it. All right, y'all, go touch some grass. I like counting prime numbers backwards. That is one I said earlier, but that is one that I recommend a lot, especially for people who like may have some anxiety, where like counting down from 10 just sounds like you're about to take off. That's not good. And so doing things backwards connects a different part of our brain. See, now we're talking about grounding. Doing things backwards requires a different part of our brain than whatever the task we're doing forwards would be. And so saying the alphabet backwards is a good example. It's what a lot of people use. But the more you practice that, the more you do that, the better you get at it. And then your brain doesn't have to engage in it. Now it's just memorization. And so that's a different part of our brain. So doing things backwards, and then like why I use prime numbers is because you do really have to think about it. But any sequence, whether it's the alphabet, whether it's prime numbers, whatever it is, the more you practice that, the more it becomes memorization, and then it's not doing what we want to do. So, do things backwards, write your name left-handed. And that stuff is good for grounding and also brain plasticity, so that when you get older, your brain deteriorates at a slower rate instead of eating itself. How fun! Hooray! Look at that. That was a hopeful message that your brain doesn't eat itself so fast. That sounds nice. Aging with brain plasticity intact. Hooray. Okay. That's what I got for this week. I am going on vacation soon. It is needed. Get to enjoy some time with family, chosen family. Get to enjoy some time with children and summer and swimming. So that will be lovely and great. I really am doing quite well while the world burns. I just like having to talk about this stuff, I think is what it is. It would be nice if this was not something that I just happened to see while watching a news program. I'd like to just be talking about how to deal with dopamine and how to do grounding and some therapy basics. But, here we are. And last week's episode was about neo-Nazis, so I thought grounding would be appropriate. This week's episode was about pedophiles. We do need to do a grounding episode. But I have some great guests lined up, and I know I keep saying that, but it's just really summer. It's me getting through summer when my schedule is different and hard to schedule guests. So we will get back on track with interviewing other people and not just me, talking about the religious trauma that is present in our daily political lives. Okay. I love you all so much. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. Peace.